Hi, Kuljit. It's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And the topic that you have picked is one that I'm so looking forward to hearing more about. So before, any further without further ado, I would like you to introduce to me what it is that you have identified as a turning point in your life, please.
Okay, so there were a few turning points, but the major one was when I became really ill. It was really unusual for me because I'd been the healthiest one out of all my family, really, even down to colds and things like that. And it was in my early 40s when my health started just deteriorating, and I had no idea why. I had bouts of tiredness, unusual tiredness, not just rest and you're okay, um, but just feeling really low, low energy. Symptoms in different parts of my body, pains, burning symptoms, aches, and they just increased and increased. And for the first year or two, I just tried to cope, pushed through, adapted really well, did things a bit differently, started to rest when I needed to, carried on doing everything I was doing really, but that pushed my body too far. Um, and eventually, in 2010, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, severe fibromyalgia, and arthritis in my hands and my feet. Um,
So just I want to just ask you what for people who don't really know what fibromyalgia is, because it's probably not a condition that we often hear about. Can you maybe just give us a little bit of insight on what that actually is?
so they say there's no cure for it, and it's pain pathway problems, so pain perception. So basically, you can get pain all over your body. And for me, even my clothes hurt. So my hair would hurt, my teeth would hurt. And it's just something that they tell you to learn to manage the pain. So it can be quite severe and it leads to all other sorts of symptoms like insomnia, brain fog. You can get burning symptoms. It can feel like sharp searing pain. It can feel like it's in your bones. So there's all different sensations of pain. I remember having pain in my feet, pins and needles pain though, that hurt. So pins and needles to the next level, and that stayed there for 3 months and I
God.
had no idea. So, what they do to test it, they have different points on your body, which they just touch. And when they touch them, if you get severe pain, that's a tender point. And if you have them on both sides of your body or on certain quadrants of the body, then they just diagnose you. So that's the test. They just poke you a little bit.
So you were diagnosed with that alongside chronic fatigue and arthritis. And what did you do when that sort of slightly devastating diagnosis was handed to you?
Um, I was lost, to be honest. I was completely lost. I mean, had been an optometrist for 20 years, so I was kind of medically trained, like this is a condition, so and then this is the treatment. But when I was told there's no cure, there's no treatment, but we can give you medication to manage all the symptoms, I literally had tremors, slurred speech, sometimes blurred vision. So there was a whole host of medication that I needed to take. And I was desperate, so I took it. But the side effects just were frightening for me, and made me feel worse. So I literally stopped that in a week. Then I was left to my own devices. So I literally cried, I think, for 3 days non-stop because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to find help. I didn't know what help I did need, but because every time I went to the doctors, all my tests were normal. I should have been in perfect health, yet here I was in pain. Couldn't sit, couldn't stand, couldn't even lie down for a few minutes without pain. And then I couldn't walk because the arthritis got worse and I got neuromas on my feet. So literally, I was stopped from doing anything at all. Had to stop work, lost my career. And I had to grieve. I think I was grieving. I couldn't be mum to my kids like I used to be, couldn't work, couldn't be the wife I was, couldn't take care of my house, my home, or even myself. So I was very lost, and that was a very scary time actually. But then I kind of had a thought that, there must be a reason why my body's doing this. And even though I was told there was no cure and they didn't know why it was happening, I somewhere deep down knew that there was a reason for it. So that's what I decided, that I had to find what the cause was, because then there would be something I could do about it. So my positive, after all the crying, my positivity kicked in. And I got curious. I was like, well, what could it be? If nothing's showing physically on the tests and all the investigations I had, there must have been something else I was missing. And so I kind of prayed, I asked questions, put them out there into the universe. And I started to look at what I could do for myself to help myself, because you can imagine at this time, my stress levels were up here. Just every day was a struggle. For me, it was the nights were the worst, but it was like going through the dark night of the soul every day, because I knew I was going to be in pain. There was no let up. But that thought that there is a reason, and if I can find the reason, I can help myself. So I started just to look, and I started to meditate. I started to learn about breathing and what I could do for myself. And the biggest thing that had a huge impact was I started gratitude practice. And when I did my gratitude practice and I started feeling a bit different, I just thought I need to do this more because this feels a bit better than where I am. And so I just did the things that helped me. Meditation, it was a struggle. I was used to being on the go, being superwoman, trying to do everything for everyone, just taking care of everyone, as I think so many of us do. And it was hard to rest. It felt like I'm doing something wrong, I'm lazy, I shouldn't be. And it was really hard for me to just not do something, like to switch off. So I struggled with it for about 3 months, but I knew it was good for me, so I was going to stick with it. And one day I just thought, well, if nothing happens, at least I've just rested. And when I let go of the attachment of what meditation should be, like I should be shutting off my mind, all these thoughts shouldn't be there, I should be quiet, it kind of became a lot easier. And I think there are lots of myths of meditation, that of how it should be, but from my experience, it's really individual. It's that point where you kind of zone out, the world fades away and you're in your own zone. So it could be music, it could be art, it could be dance. So they were my starting points.
Yeah.
And what started to come up was really surprising. I started to connect to my body, and instead of going, oh God, I'm feeling this pain and it's awful and it's horrible and I hate it, I started to kind of think, okay, I'm just going to feel it and see what it's like. Really connect to it, and almost asking it in my meditations, what are you trying to tell me? Why are you there? What's the reason? And all sorts of things started coming up. Memories of pain, of emotional pain, of trauma, of overwhelming experiences when I was lost or felt alone. And I started to um, be able to be with those experiences and be okay through them.
Mm.
And it was quite a process because it was quite scary initially. But I'd also learned EFT by then. So all my focus had been to heal and find the root causes. And I'd learnt emotional freedom technique, which is tapping, where you tap on different acupressure points. So as these emotions came up, I was able to tap and they calmed down. And I was able to see, what I actually believed about myself. Through my childhood, I believed I was to blame, I was wrong, I wasn't allowed to speak, I shouldn't be seen because it was dangerous, all sorts of things. And it started to explain why I was the way I was, why I was quite a perfectionist, if I started a job, I had to finish it, I couldn't leave it, I just couldn't do it. All these crazy habits I had that I hadn't really no understanding of up to that point. And it made a huge difference. So these experiences came up. I would in some way resolve them. It was almost as if I knew what to do. I was felt quite safe with it. Most people aren't safe to deal with traumatic experiences because they can literally re-traumatize themselves. You
Mm.
can literally transport yourself back to where you are. And that's why people have flashbacks and PTSD. But it's a bit like for if you had a good memory from your childhood, maybe your mum cooked a specific meal and you smell it somewhere, you're transported right back to that point in time, and that comes up. This is the other way round. This is transported into the painful emotions. And I started studying and researching pain. It fascinated me, and what I learned was that the brain processes pain, physical pain, in the same way with the same pathways and neurons and brain areas that it does emotional pain. So as a child, I didn't know what to do with all these painful, overwhelming emotions. No one taught me. I never saw it around me. This is why I think we get lost with it.
Mm.
And they were all suppressed and buried inside. And at some point, you reach your tipping point. Something might happen, a stress might happen, you might have a virus or an illness or an accident or a huge stress with a relationship, and that tipping point opens up. And what I realized was all the pain I'd suppressed was now being expressed in my body. So there was a lot of pain.
So I've got, I mean, that's just so fascinating, Kuljit. And I mean, obviously people who are listening can't see you, but today you are the picture of health. I mean, you look amazing. So I think for people who might be thinking what actually happened, I don't want to be as, have spoilers, but we're going to talk about your journey of how you actually dealt with this discovery of what was causing pain and you've come to the other side of it. But in that process of discovering it, because anyone who's suffering any pain, let alone the intensity and the breadth of pain that you are experiencing, that is hard to even quieten your mind to,
Yeah.
to just go within and to do all the things you did. So I think my question to you is that, combined obviously with the fact that you talked about, sometimes it's maybe dangerous for someone to do that, especially if they've been through a really traumatic experience. So someone who's listening is maybe going through a similar, ailment. um, how should they determine whether it is safe for them to try and heal themselves compared to going to someone? Like, for example, did you go to a counselor or a therapist to kind of overcome some of the emotional traumas that you dealt with? What would your sense be on what would be the right approach for someone who's listening and thinking, yeah, I'm suffering from that. I'd quite like to heal myself too.
I think it's really important that you're safe when you do it. Um, what I did, I managed to do a lot of my healing through my training. So, with other trainees, so in a safe environment. So, through my EFT training, the tapping training, the matrix training, matrix reimprinting, all focused on trauma. So, I managed to do it with other people. But
Mm.
initially, I was unusual in that the way it came up for me was a way that I could do it. It was a learning process, but it was step by step. I'd almost taken charge of what I was going to do and prioritize my own healing in my life. So for other people, I think what I normally say is check in with your distress levels. First of all, can you be with the pain? Can you sit with the symptom? Because I see people with high anxiety a lot, and chronic pain. So, not only those illnesses, but unexplained medical symptoms that are there, that are real, but there's really no explanation. And really, the first process is connecting to your body. And that is really difficult. So you don't go into a trauma, you don't go into any experience until it comes up. But the first process is really, can you connect to your body and just be? And there's different ways to do that. And that's a really difficult thing for so many of us to do
Mm.
because we spend all our time thinking up here and we're actually taught to be like that. So for most people, we get lost in our thoughts
And
and we
what would
can
be a
get lost in the
simple,
symptoms.
yeah, what would be a simple way for somebody who's just trying to you know, discover their distress levels, but also maybe just listen to what their body might be trying to tell them, which could be a really important starting point in any recovery. What would be a really simple way for someone to do that? How would you go about advising
I
them?
love to keep things simple. So that's real and practical because we live our lives and we've got lots of things to do. So it's got to kind of fit in. And the first thing I think we all need to do is stop and have some reflection time. Slowing down for most people is very hard. And what these conditions do is they slow you down and they stop you because otherwise you can't actually get that connection. So I think stopping in your day for a few minutes and just being, not doing anything, that thing I found really hard to do, and just practice that as your first step.
Yeah.
And while you're doing that, the simplest thing that we always have is our breath. And if you can focus on your breath, I often say to people, just take the energy from your mind down into your heart and just imagine your heart's breathing and
Lovely.
focus on that as you just stop and slow down. And that really is one of the key first steps because that's where you gain awareness of what really is happening for you.
Yeah. And Kuljit, you mentioned, you realize you were somebody who was always putting yourself maybe at the bottom of the list of priorities. You were caring for everyone else, taking responsibilities that maybe didn't even belong to you, but you were just there for everyone else. And how, so your kind of journey to discovering that you needed to put yourself first, at least some of the time, how was that for you? And how did your family and your immediate circle of people who had got used to being a certain way, how did they respond to this change in you?
Um, well, that's a really brilliant question, right? That's a really great one because um, it was hard. You know, when you've never done something and you're being different and you realize that it's really important to you, what I kept at the top of my mind was my children. That's what helped me. Even though I had to prioritize myself now, I knew that I wanted to be there for them. And because my illness was so scary, the fears of what you're going to be like in the future is horrendous. I mean, I envisaged being in a wheelchair, and what if it was genetic, all these things that I'd read in forums that kind of go around in your mind. I knew how important it was for me to do it. So I would, when my children were quite small, because they were 4.5, 10.5, and 11.5, I would close the door. I explained to everyone, Mummy needs her rest. I'm going to meditate, and you only disturb me for emergency. So I just told them, and I closed the door. And interestingly, communicating that to them was really interesting. I don't think it was something I would have done before if I hadn't had to, you know. And they didn't disturb me. So I did have that time. But actually, I think they actually saw something different in me and they quite liked it. I know they were used to doing things, but what I found over time was that they started to pick up some slack without me telling them. I mean, I really noticed it, not so much in my children, but in my husband. I didn't say anything to him. I was just being different. And what I noticed was that he started doing things like washing up, or things that I would normally say, oh, nag him to do. And he would do automatically. So the change in me rippled out to them. And I think it was really difficult for them initially because, none of them knew what was going on. My children didn't understand why I couldn't do what I did before. And I remember saying to my son once, you've got to come and help me with the shopping because I literally can't do it otherwise. And he didn't want to do it. And that was really painful, but, you know, it was a process of really saying, no, I can't do this, and being really clear with that. So I did have to be right at the center of my own healing. And however hard it was for me, what got me through was that if I do this, I can be the mum I want, and I'm doing it for them, because if I'm healthy, if I'm well, and if I'm happy, then everyone around me is happy. And I really got to see that because I asked them one day, I was feeling so much different. I mean, I didn't know it was possible. I had never felt safe in my body, really, not even safe in the world. And I started to feel happiness, but not happiness because someone did something or said something. I just felt happy inside, and I'd never felt that ever before. And I kind of had this peace. So one day I kind of said to my children and my husband, I said, have you noticed any difference in me? Has anyone noticed anything? Because I was feeling it. And they all said, in their own words, they all said, well, you seem much more free and you seem much happier.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think I've come to understand that, one of the greatest gifts that parents can give their children is to be happy.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of parents think, their job is to make their children happy, keep them safe, and they sort of end up martyring themselves, especially mothers, maybe fathers too.
Yeah,
That,
definitely.
I've got to just do this because, it's all about my children. But your children are looking at you, and if they don't see you happy within yourself, they're just going to not feel happy. So I think that's a fantastic, achievement for you to have gone from an extreme of, always putting yourself last to just gently initiating this change of being, but for them to appreciate it and also realize that that's what makes them happy too. And I guess I want to just go back, if I may, to what you said earlier about, you realizing that some of this pain was coming from emotional pain that you had suppressed in your childhood. And I wonder if you could maybe give us a little bit of a glimpse on what kind of things, because my experience is that people often think that when we talk about emotional trauma, it's like horrible stuff, like,
Yeah,
being beaten up or being abused in some way. But often it's not that. It's the smaller microaggressions. It's actually sometimes even parents not realizing,
yeah,
they're doing the best thing for their child, they think.
yeah.
But in the process of which something is happening to the child that is causing this stored up pain. So I'm wondering if you'd be happy to share a little bit about what sort of pain you are talking about when you say you had
Okay.
trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of different types of pain, but you're right. Little traumas where my mum was always busy. She couldn't spend time. She was busy looking after everyone, working, family. My parents were working class, so they both had to earn money. And, what I missed was a connection and time with her.
Yeah.
Um, she was taking care of us, and I knew she loved us, but there was something missing for me. It was something I needed, time to sit and talk. There was no communication. Um, Things weren't expressed. It felt like there were a lot of hidden things. My parents didn't really communicate with us. So, whatever we saw, heard, we made up our own stories and conclusions. And we felt it. You feel it in the atmosphere as children. You sense it and take it all on. If something's not right, you kind of know, don't you? But then you don't know what it is. So, it's quite confusing. So, there was lots of that. Um, and again, my dad was really busy as well. So it was often being one of the things that was really difficult, that really felt painful to me as a child, was being kind of a middle child. Um, I always felt left out. I
Mhm.
just felt, my older two, my brother and sister, the older ones, they would be with mum doing stuff. They would be given instructions, attention, often that they didn't want. But for me, it was like, oh, and my younger sister, who was about 14 months younger, she was the baby. So she got the cuddles and the attention. And I just used to wish, oh, I wish dad looked at me like that or picked me up like that. And that was quite traumatic for me, just being the invisible one. So I learned that if I worked really hard and I did things that the others didn't want to do, I got some attention, I got some approval. And that was a habit that I carried on, looking for approval, seeking validation. And I never knew that. And these habits and things I started to believe about myself, that, oh, they don't love me as much as they love my younger sister, or, it's always my fault. If someone gets told off and you get the blame, and it was like, oh, it's my fault. I've done something wrong. And I used to really take that in and keep it inside. We never really talked about any of those things or showed our feelings. So, mum and dad didn't show their feelings. So, I learnt not to show my feelings. So, I got so good at it that, even if I physically fell and was bleeding, I was constantly falling in my life. And I know why, because I was constantly scared. So, my feet would trip me up. But I would just ignore it. To me, it was nothing.
Why were you constantly scared?
There was a lot of violence growing up. Let's say my dad ran the house with an iron hand. So if you did speak out of line, or if you didn't show total respect, or if you said something you wanted when they didn't want you to do that, then it was a tough punishment. It was painful. And there were a few times where my older brother and sister really got beaten, and I could hear the screams. So that was one of the bigger traumas. So I kind of associated with being wrong as being dangerous. But also, there was quite a lot of other violence in the extended family, but also outside. So, some racism, had, names called. Something that was quite frightening was when um, I was probably 10 or 11, and we lived in a old Victorian house, but there was a pub down the road, and 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, whenever the pub's closed, we'd all be asleep, and suddenly there'd be people banging on the doors, shouting and screaming, racist remarks. That's really frightening. Loud noises. So for a long time, I was really jumpy with loud noises. So they were some of the bigger traumas. But I learned that the world is dangerous. There's people who just don't like us, don't want us, for whatever reason. And as a child, you don't know why.
Yeah.
And you take it all very personally. It's always about you, especially up to the age of 7, 8 years old. Everything that happens around you, we tend to take very personally, as in it's about us. We don't think, oh, our parents are going through a lot, they're very stressed. We don't think like that. Children don't. And so you tend to take it on as it means something about me, about you, yourself. So, yeah, I had lots of beliefs about myself that I'm not worthy, I don't deserve love. Um, you know, at even one point, I'm ugly, I'm bad, I'm wrong. So I had all these, and a huge one, which took me a while to work through, was I'm not good enough.
Mm. And when you were in that state of, despair or distress, obviously you didn't feel able to talk to your parents. What about your siblings? Did you have a connection with them? Was it possible to go and talk to them?
I was very close with my younger sister. We played together. We were joined at the hip. We were similar ages. My older brother was often away studying, so he did medicine. So he was, I don't remember him that much growing up. And my older sister was the responsible one with my mum. So, getting told to take care of us and things like that. But none of us really learned to communicate.
Mm.
So we didn't do it. None of us spoke to each other about what happened or how painful it was, or because we didn't learn it from our parents. They never did. So we never knew there was something we could talk about. It was just like, it's not the done thing.
Yeah.
Um,
So you didn't even hear them communicate with each other, let alone communicate to you and your siblings.
yeah, nothing about feelings, nothing about what's going on. We just kept everything to ourselves. It was that age old saying, isn't it? Just get on with it.
Yeah.
You just deal with it however you do. For me, it was push it all, and I think for all of us actually, it was push it deep inside, and bury it away.
Yeah.
And we're really resilient as children. We model our parents. So, for example, if a young child sees his mum screaming because there's a spider, he'll automatically believe spiders are dangerous, and he'll have a spider phobia. So, we unconsciously take on the patterns of our parents, as to this is how it's meant to be, this is how we're supposed to be in the world. And we don't do it consciously, but we're just downloading information, data from everything around us. So we just learn to be that way.
And so part of your recovery was recognizing that this is what had happened, unbeknownst to you. And did you kind of do any of the sort of the inner child work, where you kind of became the responsible, nurturing parent to your inner child? Was that part of your recovery as well?
That was a huge part of my recovery. That was initially how I got through those painful memories that began to come up for me. And when I did, I felt so different. I couldn't believe it that I would then go, oh, I hope the next one comes up now. Because to
Oh,
me, it was like, wow, I didn't know I could feel different. I didn't really know how I was feeling. It was just normal for me. Um, but since then, I've learned a lot of easier ways. a lot of different ways of actually processing through it much more quickly.
Would you be able to
And
share with us? I mean, because I think, I in my work, I sometimes, talk to clients about the inner child work. And I think it's a bit hard for people to understand what it means and how to go about doing it. So I think it'd be great to have your, first-hand experience of how you did that, but also the simpler way that you've discovered to
okay,
do it.
so it was really, first of all, being okay with going there. And when I had decided I needed to find the root causes, I had literally decided in my head that whatever it took, wherever I needed to go, I would go and I would do it. So that was a promise I kind of held in myself that, right, wherever I went, I would do it. So having done that, I actually went into the memories. But I went in as me now, not as me as a child. And that might be a really odd concept for people. But as we said, when you get transported back, it's almost like you're there. You can then be there for yourself. So the journey, the adventure is being there for yourself when you thought nobody else was there, when you couldn't talk to someone. And it's not that easy, because you can associate with the child, so you can not be your adult self, you can become the child self, which is why it's really important not to do anything traumatic for yourself in that way. But I was able to do some of the easier memories, some of the less traumatic memories first, and that's where I started. That's what came up for me first. So things like being told off at school, or being blamed for something that I didn't do, or, not being hugged by dad when my sister was hugged, things like that. So that's where I started. And literally, it was just comforting myself like we would do as an adult to a child, and letting that little child express herself if and when she was ready. Sometimes they're not ready.
So in that instance, where you were feeling left out of the affection that your father was showing towards your sister, would you, going back into that memory as you are now, would you sort of step in and say, "Come, I'll hug you"? How would it work? Just maybe give us a little bit more, I suppose, practical example of how you would go and console the younger you that was feeling left out.
Ro, I've just got the doorbell's gone. Could we just pause
Oh,
for a
yeah,
second?
yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, sorry, he's been ringing a couple of times.
that's fine. So that I suppose my thinking there was that, so you go back into a memory that you remember feeling you're left out of, affection that your father was showing towards your siblings, and you wanted the same, but you didn't get it. So as a grown up, when you go back into that memory, how do you console that child in you that really wanted that affection but wasn't getting it?
So the first thing is you just be there with them. Okay, so you're just there, you introduce yourself, you say, they often recognize you because they know you, um, and you just be with them, and you tell them it's okay.
Yeah,
They're okay.
yeah,
It's okay. And then you let them express if they feel comfortable, and you just give them what they need. So if they need a hug, you sit and you hug them. If they want to sit on your lap, you let them sit on your lap. Whatever evolves through the memory. And often they will tell you how they feel. So if they feel left out or unloved, or unworthy, and you show them that they're not, and you tell them that they're not.
Yeah.
And something that was really helpful for me was actually saying, I'm always here for you whenever you need me.
Yeah.
That was really powerful for me, just kind of having this different sense of things. And little by little, it makes a difference.
And before we go on to that simpler process that you talked about, I want to ask you what happens if someone has learned to be really resilient, and part of that process has been to kind of archive or almost suppress memories. So for instance, sometimes you sense that something has happened in your childhood that makes you feel this way, but you can't quite access those memories. It's like you've put them into storage and you
Yeah.
can't find the key to get into that room where you've
Yeah.
put them. So what would you do with that situation?
I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's a reason it's been put away,
Yeah.
because it's not safe for you to go there on your own. So the subconscious will keep you safe. That's why it keeps all this information. It's all for us, actually, and only the memories that are safe for you will come up for you, and they come up when they're ready. So you often people, when they start this, they just want to go and do a deep dive, but often you can't, because, and it's not the safe way to do it, because there'll be things on top of that, layers or experiences on top, which will which need to be resolved before you can do the deeper layers safely, before you can even access them.
There's
And
like
it's really important to know
layers.
that.
Yeah, I get that. So what was the simpler process that you discovered? Is that something that somebody who's not done all the other work that you've done, could they go straight to the simpler process that you're going to describe?
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. It was something when you've suffered and you've had all these beliefs that aren't true, and all these habits and coping mechanisms that you use all through your life. Um, it's it's hard. It's hard. And especially what if you don't know why you are the way you are, and you just think, well, this is who I am. So it is hard, and not wanting people to suffer unnecessarily was a really key factor in what I wanted. I
Mm.
would have wanted that for me as well. So, and this is what I want for the people I work with. So I was always looking for something new. So I trained in tapping and matrix reimprinting, but I knew there was more. I knew would be something else. So, and it came along, and it's called logo synthesis. And I've just finished my 2-year training and just become a practitioner. So that's great. But it's really a way where you can tap into these things, but you can release them really quickly.
Mm.
It focuses on looking at everything as energy and information. And when you do that, you use the power of words to clear it. And what the metaphor I use for it, which really makes sense to me, is if you had an imprint on photographic film.
Yeah.
So these are these memories and these experiences, or these unprocessed emotions. And then if you shine light on it, what happens to the image? It disappears. And that's what I find happens with logo synthesis. And you just activate the person slightly. So there has to be an awareness of something, and a distress in your body. And then we use 3 sentences. We use the power of words to shift and change that energy. And it works very quickly. It's very simple, much less complex or complicated than maybe in a child work
Yes.
and other modalities. And I've never experienced anything like it. So both for myself and for people I work with.
Yeah. So I would love to, talk about how you help people, but I think I want to come back to your story because obviously we talked about how you started to discover these memories and you started to, make time for yourself. So what happened next? I mean, how did you slowly recover from these crippling, ailments that you had?
So, first of all, to do that emotional work, I needed to be in a better place.
Mm.
Um, I don't think anyone can do it when you're in severe pain and you can't move and you can't walk and you can't sit. So, luckily, fortunately, I was introduced to phototherapy patches. Now, I couldn't take medication for my symptoms because my body was too sensitive, and the side effects were too horrendous. But I could do something more natural. So I started wearing these little phototherapy patches that helped to calm down my symptoms a little bit.
What
So
is it?
whereas the medication didn't touch them, these phototherapy patches, they actually lessened it. They didn't cure it or take it away completely, but it left me in a position where I could cope a little bit better.
What is phototherapy? I've never heard of it before.
So these patches, you put on acupressure points,
Yeah.
and what they do, they reflect the energy from the body back into the body. If a signal is chaotic, so if you've got pain, basically the signals aren't smooth, and it tries to smooth out the signal. And they go to your cells. That signal goes to your cells. So it uses your own body energy and it changes, modulates the signal to your cell. So to put it simply, when we go outside in the sun, we get a tan.
Mm.
And we produce vitamin D. So there's a frequency of light that's hitting our skin that's telling our body to produce vitamin D or produce a tan. And these work in a similar way, except they use your body's energy to send that signal. So I wore pain patches, sleep patches, energy patches, and stress relieving patches. And within 3 to 4 weeks, I started to sleep again. So, and that was the biggest thing they did for me. After that, I didn't look back. My hope was already there. I knew that if these could work, and they're just little plasters, that there was a lot more that I didn't know out there. And I think that's really true for all of us. We only know what we learn.
Yes.
And yet there's a whole world of information. So I started feeling better. I started to sleep. The blurred vision went. I could focus. I could think again. The brain fog went. My pain was less, so I could cope. And that's when I started thinking, well, right, let's find out what these patches are doing, because I didn't have a clue. And so I started looking at all the research, and that's where energy came. I started looking at quantum physics. I was always a bit scientific and liked to understand things. And it all started to make sense for me. But it just opened up this whole new world that I'd never, ever had any exposure to.
Mm.
And so it never stopped from there.
And so now are you completely free of all those painful symptoms? Did it manage to also alleviate your arthritic symptoms?
Absolutely. My neuromas disappeared, my arthritis disappeared. I've not had symptoms now for 8 years, just over 8 years. In fact, doing the emotional work and the memories, resolving that, actually cleared my migraines that I had since I was 11 years old. So, yeah, all sorts of things on many different levels. Yeah, I'm really healthy, fit, well. I don't even, fingers crossed, touch wood, actually tend to get many colds or anything like that anymore.
So clearly, the work you did was a major part of shifting some of that trapped energy that was causing pain. And when you get better, there's often, and I'm guilty of this, that you slide back
Yeah.
into your old ways of doing things because you think, well, I'm fine now, which obviously is a very dangerous thing to do. So how did you prevent that from occurring for you and for your family? Because
I didn't sometimes, I think we're all human.
yeah,
And occasionally now I still notice where I'm starting pushing myself or doing too much. But you have a different awareness. I'm a different person. I don't need those coping mechanisms. So, where there was a drive because of all this other baggage, people can call it whatever, all these unprocessed traumas and memories, that was almost like a bungee rope on me, which would pull me back. So whenever I was tired or stressed, that would pull me back. But having cut those ropes, the drive to be like that isn't there as much. It's just not there. It's a much more natural way of being yourself. So, as I said, it still shows up occasionally, but I have a much greater awareness. My lifestyle and pace is very different. I seem to get quite a lot done in a really slow pace. Um, and, I'm really connected to my body now. I'm not always in my head. So I kind of pick it up really quickly. And then right, that's it. No, I know where that's coming from. Or I find where that leads me to and I deal with it. If there's something else I haven't resolved, then I deal with that. So ongoing, I keep moving forward. It's a daily practice for me. I love the healing aspect of it, because I feel so different.
so you healed yourself, and then you realized that there was a real opportunity for you to help others who are also experiencing a similar, challenge. So tell us a bit about that.
So I never went back to optometry after that. I just knew with every cell in my body that this is something I really wanted to do. It felt like I was born to do it. So I focused on training, becoming a wellbeing coach, becoming a specialist practitioner in chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia recovery. I just knew that people were suffering and they didn't need to, and it was because of the lack of knowledge or the lack of information and support around them. And I wanted to be part of something that could give people the support they needed, because that's what I wanted when I was, back then when I was ill.
Yeah.
If I'd have known, had this information, and I knew there was somewhere to go, I wouldn't have hesitated. And I just wanted people to have a choice and an option, not to have to manage and live with their symptoms, because that's what we're told. Even now, people are told that, and it's heartbreaking when it's not necessary. And I think having the difference in my experiences, I just want the people that I work with to feel, even a fraction of the difference that I felt. And if that happens, then I'm a very happy, fulfilled person. So it's given my life a lot of meaning. So I set up my business, Centre Balance. They were my lessons that I learned to be the centre of my life. And to find a balance that works for me, not that I think, I should live, or what the value of success is for others and the expectations for others, but what's important to me and what gives me balance and centered groundedness in my life. So, and I see people from all over the country with either high anxiety, I've seen people with depression, and chronic illness, just chronic pain or medically unexplained symptoms. And I've never looked back. And I use, my latest training, I mainly now use the logo synthesis. I would teach people tapping because it empowers them to regulate and deal with things that come up in daily life. And havening, that's another one where you just stroke, because that power of touch is powerful again to your body. It sends signals of safety and comfort. But for the trauma work, the healing work, logo synthesis is what I use for my clients. But I also continue with my research and my reading because it's just fascinating. And I don't think we know our potential as human beings. it's something big for me that I want to discover my potential. But for everyone, I think, as I said, we only know what we learn. And when we learn and read more, then it can benefit us in our lives. If we don't have this information, the impact is huge on our health, on our well-being, on our happiness. And I think now I put my happiness at the top of my list for me and my family, and everyone I work with. It's all about, if you're internally happy and at peace and have this inside you, then you deal really well with the outside world.
Yeah, I love that. And my sort of final question for you is, we talk about sort of fulfillment, and I love that you're talking about, potential and possibility. And from your experience, clearly it took a lot of pain for you to discover that. And I'm sort of a huge believer, as I'm sure you are too, that why wait until you experience that pain? Why not look at, things from a point of what's possible for me? And can I be proactive and not wait until something painful
Mm.
challenges me? So in that sense, I suppose I have two final questions. One is that what would your suggestion be to people who have maybe some small niggles that may be telling them that there could be something wrong going on in them, but not wait until it becomes such a problem that they have to go to a doctor? How would you suggest that they start doing some of the work that you did?
As I said in the beginning, I think we tend to push these stresses away and just keep going and get busy just in our usual habits that we've learned. And it is that slowing down. If we're constantly busy, you will just, oh, I'll deal with it later, and you'll just push it away. And that time never then comes, because then there's something else. There's always a to-do list, isn't there? So it is that slowing down. And I think once you start to slow down and appreciate, it's almost like practicing mindfulness. So, what I would suggest is, in your daily things that you do when you're brushing your teeth, do it mindfully. So, be present to how you're holding your toothbrush, or if you're brushing fast or pressing hard. It's about attention and focus. And when you slow down, you really can gain so much more information. So, if someone's got a little stress, then just slow down and sit with it. And if that's one step too far, just stop and write it out, journal it out. Let yourself process through some of the things that come up for you, because that whole act of slowing down to write it down, you're not doing anything else. Your focus is on that. And I think people are frightened of focusing on stress.
Yeah.
We're kind of wired to avoid it, aren't we? So it is that, having the information that it's okay to look at it. Just sit and look at it. I always say that if we don't look at it, it builds up and we take it with us. So we take it everywhere we go. We don't escape it. And yet, if we sit and look at it, on some level, you're processing some of it.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
you haven't denied it, you've acknowledged it's there, and you've gone, well, I'll deal with it in this way.
And it was your point about, when you shine a light on something, it disappears, and maybe articulating it in words
Yeah,
is actually in a way shining a light on what's going on for you.
absolutely. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So my final question, Kuljit, is what is your definition of a fulfilled life?
Oh, my fulfilled life is actually being happy, continuing my own healing journey, because there's still more to do. I think it's probably a lifetime adventure, which I quite relish. I quite relish that, and look forward to that. But actually, for me, it's really simplicity and knowing what's important for me, valuing that in my life, and doing things that bring me joy, love, and peace. Whether it's for myself, whether it's for my family, and whether it's for others in the world. That for me is a fulfilling life.
That is so beautiful. And I think what you are such a great example of is that by doing that, some people think, oh, that's very selfish, but
Mm.
actually it's not. It's like that oxygen mask analogy on a plane, you
Yeah.
can't help others until you yourself are completely well and, in a place of, feeling joyful and purposeful.
Yeah.
Could you thank you so much for coming and joining me today and for sharing your story, and you look amazing, and I wish you every success in your continued journey of self-healing and also helping others.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure, Ray.
Thank you.